Hey everyone, I'm Trent Kusters, co-founder and studio director of League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. I've had a chat this morning with Phil Crifo, who's the creative director of a studio called Awaceb. Now, you may be more familiar with their game, Chia. You may have seen the beautiful trailers. It's this stunning game that's an open world action adventure, kind of like toy box or sandbox, inspired by their childhood home of New Caledonia, a small Pacific island just off the coast of Australia. And we do, as we are, usually known to in the podcast, go all the way back to Phil's first interaction with games. We speak about him leaving New Caledonia for the big smoke of Nice, France, to do his tertiary education in film and animation, and that realization that he wanted to make games, in which he pulled his co-founding partner of Awaceb, Chia, out from New Caledonia to France, and the experience of making their first game in the 2010s as indies and navigating that, but then releasing that game, Fossil Echo, to almost no fanfare or success. We talk about that experience and that emotional roller coaster of going through that alongside personal issues that are happening at the time, and how still, even in that moment, they found the ability to move forward, make another game, one bigger and bolder, that would become Chia. We speak about their partnership with Kowloon Knights. We speak about how they then became one of the founding studios of Kepler Interactive, a publisher that is actually owned by the studios that founded it. And Phil and his nine-member team are like, they own a publisher effectively, along with 6 other studios. It's a super interesting story, and we dive into that. But of course, then we'd spend a bunch of time talking about Chia, the game. We talk about how authentic and beautiful the experience is in sharing the story of their childhood and of New Caledonia and its complex, nuanced layers that their incredible homeland has, or home island has. We speak about how they engaged local Indigenous leaders and representatives to ensure that their stories and folklore and representation in the game was as authentic as possible, even taking their entire team to New Caledonia to meet with these people and the choirs that worked in the game and the voice actors. It's an incredibly emotional experience and journey and conversation, really special. And then we just dive into a bunch of the nitty-gritty about some of the great mechanics in the game, like the music interactivity. We speak about the way that the game is cinematically framed and how that actually is so effective at sharing this authentic experience and message of New Caledonia. It's just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And from a game developer and his team who have one of the most pure and authentic messages behind their game, which is sharing the story of their homeland. And I really encourage you to not only enjoy this conversation, have a listen, but to check out Chia. It's on PlayStation Plus and Epic Games Store at the moment. So without further ado, here's Phil Crifo of Awaceb.
PlayStation.
Good morning, Phil, or good afternoon for you, I guess.
Afternoon, yeah. Thank you.
How are you? You're out in Montreal at the moment.
Yeah, we just moved. Well, just moved like a few months ago now.
All right, so that's a fun story that we're going to get into for sure. First of all, congrats on the release of Chia. I was playing it the other day. Beautiful, wholesome. I was going to say little game, but it's not so little compared to the size of your team. So, Absolutely. Congratulations are in order.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we get the little game a lot. I think the aesthetic kind of, leans that way, but for sure it is a chunky game.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we as you might know, we start this podcast the same way every single time, which is going right back to a developer's first sort of interaction with video games. Can you remember your earliest childhood memory with video games, or even the moment when you were like, even if it came when you were 20 or something, when you were like, this is for me, you know, this is what I want to dedicate the next however many years of my life to. When did our lovely medium grab you?
So the dedicate my life to it part has come fairly late. I remember the medium grabbing me as a player around, I don't know, I must have been 8 or 9 or something.
Mhm.
And the first game I remember is Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, the first one,
Yeah.
which I think kind of brought a lot of kids into kind of adulthood, and because it was so weird and out there and strange and unlike anything we would see in movies or anywhere, that it really sparked a thing in that, okay, games can be very different and weird and fun. And that stayed with me, I think, throughout. And then what the game that made me think, okay, maybe I want to actually make them, not just play them, was probably Minecraft, I think.
Oh, wow. What was it about Minecraft that made you want to make them? Or gave you that sort of that moment, that realization?
I think just the fact that it was made by one guy, and that it was so huge and full of, whatever you want to
possibilities.
I mean, it was just so big and so expensive and so crazy, and the fact that one guy made that, I thought, like, if I team up with a friend, we can make something twice as big.
And you gave it your best shot as well.
We did. It didn't work out.
All right. So tell me, let's go through your path to, the founding of Awaceb and, doing all that with your pals. So what happened after this moment? Actually, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about young Phil growing up in New Caledonia, because this is kind of very relevant to the game we're about to talk about, right?
For sure.
So you grew up born in New Caledonia? Grew up in New Caledonia?
Yeah, I was born there.
Yeah, and so this is the unfortunate part of the podcast is a lot of folks are probably not going to know where New Caledonia is, or why you're one of our closest neighbors in Australia, but you speak French, and so maybe give us, before we talk about your game, give us a little bit about New Caledonia, why it's so close to your heart.
Sure. That's fair. So New Caledonia is a tiny island. It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's basically, as you like you mentioned, off the coast of Australia, basically right between Australia and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. It's very, very small, and it's like you said as well, mostly unknown by the rest of the world. I think you being from Australia, you probably had heard of it, but most people from Europe or America, they usually haven't. But I mean, why is it important to me? I mean, I was born and raised there, so it's all I knew for 18 years of my life. So that's.
So you were there until you were 18.
Yeah, I moved to Europe to study.
Oh, cool.
Because outside of high school, there's no higher studies. Well, very limited higher studies opportunity there. So most people usually go either to Europe or Australia, actually.
Do you have something like to do with being like the link to France with New Caledonia? Do you have some sort of like link to tertiary education in France as well, or any opportunities there? Or
yeah, well, I mean, we we have kind of a separate education system, but it's closely tied to the French one.
Yeah.
So there are like transitioning from a New Caledonian school to a French school is fairly seamless.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is kind of a different program and different approach to some stuff.
Yeah, different curriculum and everything.
Yeah.
All right. So this Minecraft moment, how old were you when that happened?
When did Minecraft? Well, I think I probably heard about it in 2010 or something. 2020. Yeah, I think so.
Was this when you were in Europe or before you moved to Europe?
It was. I was already in Europe, so
Right.
I moved to study film 3D animation.
Yeah, cool.
Which was where I kind of hit the ceiling creatively for me in terms of my skills. I basically what I figured out later is that I was always inspired by games and all the comic books, the short stories, the stop motion stuff, the short films I ever did were all in one way or another inspired by games.
Oh, wow.
But I had no idea that, games were being made by people. Like programming was so foreign and so weird that I didn't even consider the possibility that I could actually make some. So I kind of went as close as I could, which was 3D animation and, making 3D short films. And I realized at that moment around that moment when I discovered Minecraft, I was like, Minecraft is not pretty, I was like, I can those visuals I can do, and I can do something prettier.
Yeah.
But how do I actually make it,
I think
interact?
I think the expressiveness and the success in execution of, what Marcus did with Minecraft's art direction, if you want to call it that. I mean, I guess it's obviously a cultural mainstay now, so you can, and we should, I guess. I think a lot of non-artists and semi-artists, so to speak, or like non-confident artists looked at that and were like, oh, okay, no, I can do this. I can do this. There are possibilities here. It really, I feel the same way about, Brendan Chung's games. There's such a, over at Blender Games, there's such an aesthetic achievement, in all ways, especially, in a cinematic sense. But the models, the style of the models are just so fantastic that I think it's probably a folly to look at them and be like, oh, we could do that. But it's just so inspiring in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah, for sure.
So so tell us about your aspirations when you headed off to Europe. Whereabouts in Europe were you as well?
I was in Nice in the southeast of France.
Beautiful! Wow, that's stunning.
It is. Well, it's beautiful. I wouldn't recommend it. To leave your young student years. It's not the most lively.
It's not the party town. Yeah.
No, it's not.
So, what were your aspirations at that point in time? You're talking about film and animation. Did you have aspirations of moving on to Gobelins or being the next, a New Caledonian Miyazaki, or what did you want to do?
I didn't actually, which is the
just a kid
thing.
Taking the next step, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was passionate about telling stories and putting them into moving images that I liked, but I wasn't moved and extremely excited about making movies. Like I'm not the guy who's gonna rush to the movies to see the latest Pixar or that's I do love them, and there's great stuff happening in animation, but it wasn't moving me to the core. And I realized that as I was progressing through those years. And by the time I graduated, I realized that, this is not driving me towards anything as a person. And I look back on those 3 years of studying, and I realized that every time there was an assignment or something where we needed to do an analysis of a scene, I always found a way to make it about games.
Oh, right.
to take a scene from a game rather than from a movie, and every time I did that, we needed to do an analysis of a movie poster, and I would take, game box art and stuff like that. So I realized at the end of those 3 years that I'm obviously like reaching for something that's kind of unattainable on a technical sense. And I realized that, I needed to either learn how to code.
Yep.
But I was too lazy for that.
Yes, I need to learn how to code. Nah, we'll find it. We'll find another way.
Well,
so what was your other way?
My other way, which is of course the preferred way for me, and I wouldn't do it any different, is that I reached out to a childhood friend of mine who I grew up playing games with, and I think my love for games comes in part from those moments playing games with him, and those shared moments we had. And he somehow had stayed in New Caledonia and studied computer science. So he was a programmer, but we had never, that wasn't planned. Like we had never really talked about, okay, someday we're going to team up or anything. It just worked out. And I realized like it kind of clicked. I was like, we love the same games. We grew up playing games together. He's a programmer. I'm an artist.
This is Chia.
This is Chia, yeah. Sorry.
Is your co-founder?
He is, yeah, Chia and it just made sense to give it a go. Like we had a few bucks to, fund ourselves for a while. And we're like, if we don't do it now when we go, get jobs in our respective industries or whatever, we might never, do the indie adventure thing. So we said, okay, let's give it a shot. And he joined me in France, and we started from there, from scratch. Like we didn't have any experience making games. So.
Amazing. And sorry if I missed it. Was he in France as well, or did he come across?
He came across. He was in New Caledonia, and he just graduated, and he was like, okay, I'm either going to go work in some New Caledonian bank or whatever. And I was like, I'm not going back to New Caledonia. I think it's not the best move to try to build something creative. Like it's very small.
That sort of glass ceiling is low in, for creators in New Caledonia. Yeah,
exactly. So I was like, it would be better to start something in Europe, like at the time, like conventions and stuff like that were big. Like it was cool to showcase your game on big events and stuff.
This was around 2016 or something? It
was a bit before, like 2014 or something.
Cool. Right. Yeah. That was like the peak. I remember we were flying all over the world showing our Mallow at that point in time, in the mega booth and Indiecade, and that the festival circuit, as you might call it, or the convention circuit, was just like, it was wild. That was the indie rite of passage at that time.
Yeah, for sure. And so we were like, let's not like go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean where it's going to be impossible to fly to anywhere. Let's stick to France. And so he flew in, and we gave it a shot.
Amazing. And so talk to me about giving it a shot. What was it that when you sat down, you're like, okay, Terry's like, I'm here. What are we making? What happened?
Well, obviously we shot for the moon, and
naturally, Why do something small for your first one? Yeah,
of course. So what we did is that we were smart in our own way, I guess, because we initially the initial concept we had was actually very close to what Chia ended up being.
Oh wow!
Because those sensibilities and that DNA that you can see in Chia is very much part of what we grew up playing together and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that was already there back then, but we soon realized that as a 2-people team for a first project with 0 game dev experience, it was maybe a little bit optimistic to go for an open world sandbox, like physics heavy thing. So we were like, after like a few months of prototyping, we were like, maybe let's be reasonable and scope down. And so we kind of took the essence of what we were making in terms of the story and the vibe and the art directions and things like that, but scoped down to a more traditional 2D platformer with story elements and cutscenes and things like that. And from there, once we decided, okay, let's do something more reasonable, it took like probably a little bit over 2 years to make.
And this is Fossil Echo?
Yeah, Fossil Echo.
And so tell us a little bit about Fossil Echo. What's Fossil Echo for our listeners?
So it's a 2D platformer about a boy on a journey to climb a huge tower. It's kind of a tale, like a fable type story where there's no dialogue. Everything is told through, actions and cutscenes and music, and it's very like in a fairy tale, eerie art style and environments. And it's simple puzzle platforming with a little bit of encounters here and there, but it's mostly about, a mood and kind of a more esoteric, I guess, story. It's a first game. What it is, it's a first game, with all the flows that usually come with it. So it's close to our hearts now with the nostalgia.
Yeah.
But it's far from being a perfect game.
I love that you can say that, and that you can look back on it and you can, appreciate it for that. I think, I'm 12 years into my first studio, and in some ways I wish we had made just like 4 or 5 games before we tried to make our Mellow. I mean, it worked out well, but if I think a lot of us who are sitting at the helm of our own studio sometimes daydream about like, oh, what would I do if I did it all again? And I kind of feel like it would be like game a week for a year or something like that, with a few crew. I've got a friend who remain unnamed, but like they were, in the C-suite at a big publisher, and they've left, and they're actually starting up their own studio now, and they're just kind of like co-founder dating, and they're doing like making like little prototypes and games with like different focuses, and it just sounds so sweet. And I say it to students all the time now, when they come through, or people just starting out, it's like, get it out, like get your first game out there. That pitch to ship process together and having a game under your belt, like, going through that last, like they say, 95% is in the last 5%, right? You put that game out and go through it with a team. I think it really sets you up for the next one.
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
What was it about Fossil Echo that sort of set you up in that way? Do you feel like, what were the big lessons that you learned going through it as your first game? Like you talk about looking back on it in a nostalgic way, Phil.
Well, I think that the big lesson is that a game is always bigger than you think it's gonna be, or maybe I can't design small games because we set out to make it small and it ended up being too big.
Yeah. I think I can say on behalf of everyone, that's not just you, Phil. I think that's
cool.
That's all of us. Don't worry.
That's reassuring. I think there's the big lesson was, and it's kind of boring to say that now because I think it's pretty obvious, but like making a good enough game, I'd say, is not enough for it to be successful or for it to be worthwhile or worth playing. It's definitely not an amazing game, but I think it could have been good enough with more, playtesting, like allowing ourselves more time to, listen to player feedback and change stuff and tweak and not stick as hardly to our initial vision.
Yeah.
Which I think can be hard to, I mean, it's great to have a strong initial vision, but if you don't have the flexibility to adjust based on, feedback and things like that, then you end up with a process that's super rigid, and that hurt us, I think, a lot.
Yeah. Was it at the end, was it the classic thing, like just running out of time and money and needing to get it out? Or was it a kind of a bit of like, no, the game's, you sort of hadn't even really thought to allow for that time for feedback and iteration and just sort of put it out there, and then we're like, oh shit, we should have done that? Was it like a bit of column A, bit of column B? I
think it's definitely a bit of both. It's a bit of like, we were confident that the game was solid, like that we would probably like it if it came out, but that was all based on our assumption. And
you didn't test those assumptions.
we didn't test. We weren't familiar with, the whole process outside of the art and the programming that comes with making games, like marketing or anything like that was super foreign. And we just were like, we'll put a game out there. If it's good, people will play it. And obviously it's not as simple as that.
And you self-published that as well, am I right in saying that? Like you didn't have a publisher on board or anything, so you went the whole hog for the first time around too.
We didn't know what a publisher was.
I guess you were self-published then in that case.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah. And I guess 2016 as well. I mean, there were indie publishers around, but they were kind of settling into who they all were and, what the landscape was and stuff too. I mean,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and you did get. I remember it at the time. Like it did hit the festival circuit, and you grabbed a couple of nominations and even a couple of awards and stuff like that as well, right?
Yeah, we did. I mean, the game had some strong aspects to it. Like visually, it was great. The sound was amazing. The OST is really great and actually one of the best of those couple years.
Was it the same audio crew that you worked with on? I know you worked with A Shell in the Pit on.
Yes.
But was it A Shell in the Pit on Fossil Echo as well? Oh shit!
Yep.
I didn't. Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
And same composer as well. John Robert Matz did the music for Chia. Also made the music for Fossil Echo.
I tell you what, we're going to talk about that because the music in Chia is just unbelievable. It really, it really brings the whole thing together. It's amazing. Yeah. All right, so Fossil Echo is out. What happens next? It comes out. You have this moment where you're having these realizations. I mean, when Armello came out, it was it was successful enough for us. If we complain, I guess we're technically assholes, but it didn't hit the sort of metrics that we thought it was going to hit by any means, by a factor of 4 or something. Even the reviews or how it was received, we had the same thing. We kind of, even after doing early access and stuff, there were things that I think we pigheadishly thought were okay, but weren't once it went to a broader market, or and we had to sort of pivot on that stuff too. So I understand that that experience of rolling out a game and going through that emotional sort of journey afterwards. Once you're done with it. So how did that lead into Chia? What was the sort of connective tissue between the Fossil Echo and that experience, and then spinning up and starting this beautiful game?
To be honest, that's the part of the whole adventure that I have the hardest time explaining and finding a reason for, because you saying Armello didn't hit the metrics you were going for, but Fossil Echo didn't hit any metrics. It technically did come out. It did come out, but it just...
It's like if a tree falls in the woods, but no one's there to hear it, right?
Exactly. And that, as a creator, has someone who has put a few years of their lives into something, it's a harsh moment. It's very harsh. I was also going through some personal stuff at the time that was tricky, and
it's interesting how that stuff always seems to happen at the same time, right?
For sure.
It never waits. You're going through, so this game launch looks rough. This personal stuff, we'll come back around in 6 months.
Exactly. It was all, piled up at the same time, and that's where it becomes a bit of a blur. I cannot tell you why and how we still had the drive to make something else. It didn't really make sense for us to keep going. It wasn't successful enough for us to pay ourselves well, so we had to take jobs on the side. We both started giving classes in video game schools and stuff like that, and doing side jobs. And so I don't know where we found the drive to do something else, and especially something as big as Chia. Fossil Echo should have been so discouraging,
so humbling.
We should have been okay, we tried. Well, maybe let's go to that bank, and I'll go.
Or let's do something smaller.
And I don't know. We still had the drive. Basically, the moment I think where we had to scope down Fossil Echo from the initial vision, I think was a frustration, and maybe we saw that as an excuse. We were it's because we scoped down that the game wasn't successful. Maybe the initial vision was
it's not me, it's the children who are wrong.
Exactly. And so we're like, let's go back to that initial thing that really drove us to actually make games. We set out to make that, so let's give it another go, and with what we've learned on this, let's try to make it more sustainable and to not be dumb basically this time around. And so
I totally relate to that. A dear friend of mine, David Kalina, who founded Tiger Style, that made like Waking Mars and other amazing games, once said we were trying to decide after Omello what game we should work on, and we had like a sort of mid-sized safe game. It was still ambitious, but it was safe. And then we had this other game that, we ended up signing with Private Division that never happened, but it was like this big game. And I remember David said to me when I was having a chat with him about what to do, he just said to me, is like, the safe games cannot pan out. Like you can take a bet on a safe game and, scope things down or do the sequel or whatever it might be, and they can still not pan out. So like, why not try the big crazy one, And so we did it, and it didn't pan out, but like it set us up for these two other games that we're working with Kowloon on, as you did, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think there's totally something there in what you're saying, that just because like maybe you took a defeat or something, or Fossil Echo didn't work out the way you had hoped, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should go smaller or should go safer or more sensible or try something else. Like sometimes the answer is going, what, we kind of didn't lean in enough, or it's almost at a point where you've like, there's no sort of lower to go than if you make this sort of smaller game and you scope it down and it doesn't land the way you want. So why not just, I think that's, life finds a way, right? Like Jeff Goldblum would say in Jurassic Park. And it seems like it did with you. I totally relate to, and I think it's a completely fair and logical human response to be like, fuck it, let's do the thing that's, dear to our hearts and, the reason why we're in this.
Yeah, that's basically it. It's like we set out to make something, and it was too frustrating to stop without having given it a proper shot. So we dove back, and
All right. So let's start the chat about Chia. So first of all, before we dive into it, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Chia, why don't you give us the elevator pitch for Chia? The best part about this is usually by the time we talk to folks about their games, they've been giving the elevator pitch for a good 4 years or something. So tell us what Chia is all about.
So Chia is a tropical adventure game set in a physics-driven sandbox open world inspired by New Caledonia, which we talked about a little bit. And basically the whole game is designed like a toy box where everything is interactive and tactile and analogic. And it's taking you on an adventure that's kind of driven by a story that's inspired by local folklore and traditions and cultures, and takes place in a world that's, also inspired by New Caledonia, in that we recreated iconic landmarks and things like that.
Hell yeah. And it's just a beautiful game. And I mean it not just in the aesthetic sense, but like in the heart and soul in it. So tell me about those first beginnings of Chia. You have this moment where you're kind of like, oh, fuck it, let's dive in, like, the reason that we're here in the first place.
Yeah.
How did you and Thierry get started?
So we sat down, and by the time Fossil Echo launched, we had started the studio to kind of make it official, and we decided to call it Awaceb, which is New Caledonian slang. It means kind of like it's all good, or no worries, basically. And that wasn't like, Fossil Echo is not inspired by New Caledonia at all. That wasn't what we set out to do, early on, but it kind of seeped its way into us and the studio. I think the distance from the island, it was like nostalgia kind of builds up, and you kind of get
a bit of homesickness, like
and so
the game.
For sure. And so we kind of, the first element of that is the name of the studio. And then a couple months after that, we sat down and we were like, okay, the studio is called Awaceb. What's our voice? What's the story we can tell that's going to be different, that's going to be fresh, that's true to ourselves, that only us can tell. And we had both been away from New Caledonia for maybe not 10 years at that point, but like at least like probably
Almost a
5
decade,
years. Yeah. 5 years, a bit over 5 years for me, I think. And it was enough to realize that, okay, there's that culture that we grew up in. And when you grew up in something, you kind of forget, you gotta get numbed to it. But the fact of going away kind of rekindles that thing. And at that time, it was very, very much the moment where we realized, okay, our childhood wouldn't have been the same if we didn't grow up there.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say, right?
For sure. And we were like, okay, that's probably what makes Awaceb different. Maybe not the only thing, but that's an important part of our identity. It's right there in the name, even though we hadn't thought about Chia yet. It did, happen through the name. And so we were like, let's dive into this and make it, the center pole of what this game's going to be is going to be that cultural inspiration. And that was, I think, one of the very first pillars that we established outside of it's going to be in, a physics-based open world, was that cultural inspiration.
It's such a fantastic seed, for a game. It's such an amazing gravity well of ideas and and inspiration, I can imagine. So when you first put that flag in the ground, what were the things that immediately come to your mind as kids growing up on this, this stunning? And by the way, everyone, New Caledonia, if you don't have the image in your mind already, it's like your typical Pacific island as well, with like a bunch of European architecture and influence, obviously because of the French influence there. But if you're thinking about Vanuatu, Fiji, all these incredible azure, crystal blue tropical islands, like you got a pretty good idea of what New Caledonia looks like. I think it would be pretty easy to miss a place like that when you're sitting in Nice, France, after just having your game release.
Yeah, for sure. And that's interesting because that's very true what you're saying. But New Caledonia is also like so much more as well, which was the reason why we thought it would be a super, super interesting.
That layered complexity to it?
Yeah. We thought that it has that, tropical white sand, blue lagoon type of environment, but also a lot of other biomes. Like you have those red dirt plains that look like completely Martian. You have those wet rainforest, like tropical forest type environments. Like you have like dry savannas, like that look completely out of an African, landscape and stuff like that. And we realized that this is such a good inspiration for an open world game where you want variety, but also kind of a synergy of different things that feel connected, but also that feel very different when you're in the middle of them. And that was the first thing I think that kind of clicked for us, is that we grew up in like doing very different stuff in those very different environments, and that translates like very easily to a video game environment.
You grew up in an Unreal demo already.
Basically.
All right. So it's these biomes that are sort of coming to you and everything. But because I want to, something for folks who haven't played the game that really stands out is Chia's relationship as a game and an experience to the indigenous peoples and culture of New Caledonia. So, which I can imagine, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Phil, I'm assuming you're not one of the indigenous people of New Caledonia. So not only is it such a beautiful thing to explore, but also there's a complexity there in regards to who even is exploring it or how you go about doing that. So talk to us a little bit about, now that we understand a little about the complex, layered nature of a place like New Caledonia, and it being your inspiration. Let's talk a little bit about that aspect of things and how you all went about that, how you decided that was going to be this sort of like center pool of the game.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the topics that I think we had the most back and forth about. I think the easy trap to fall into when you're doing something like any story that's inspired by a specific culture is to like go heads on into the folklore, the legends, the myths, and to go full in on that, and maybe, you know, retell a famous local story, or, you know, kind of flare up that very well known, you know, myth, and to dive into the fantastical elements of it. And we definitely do have some of those in the game. We also have like magic and more, you know, fantasy type elements. But
yeah,
we set out to make a game that felt like our childhood growing up there. And so we felt it was more truthful to that, to portray New Caledonia as we know it, which is the modern New Caledonia with, you know, all the different cultures and all the different influences from immigration and from all around the world that blended into something very unique.
And it really feels like that. Like the game, as you're playing it, you're going from like scene to scene or area to area and interacting with different people. It feels, and even like the music that you're playing as Chia in the game, because, you know, music is like a large part of the game. The tapestry is incredible, and how I think something, not having been to New Caledonia, ashamedly, considering how close it is, I fly over it every time I go to America. It feels, as much as I can imagine, like really true to that tapestry of cultures that you're talking about in New Caledonia. And it feels like a real success, I want to say, or achievement in how well and how seamlessly they're integrated in the game. It really feels like this place that's a melting pot of these different people and different experiences and perspectives and histories.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was the goal all along. And to be honest, it's also very romanticized, like an idealized version of the actual place, because we were designing it through that prism of childhood. You know, it's told you're playing as a kid and
through a child's eyes.
Yeah, and it echoes our childhood there. So it's very much not truthful to, you know, the actual real place. But it is, you know, what the place is in our hearts, basically. And it's a very positive and optimistic rendition of that place we grew up to love.
How and so let's go back a little bit to the indigenous side of things, because I imagine as a kid, like growing up, and it's a really amazing approach to it that I think that you've taken as well, in regards to telling your perspectives of, like you say, not just going, we're going to tell the indigenous story of the island or whatever, but your own through the eyes of your experience as a child, growing up and interacting with these different cultures and peoples, and your own, obviously, in New Caledonia, or all is your own in a big way. But I imagine, and I know that there is a large degree of consultation as well, right, with different folks there. So talk me through a little bit of that process of how you ensured that when you did move into those indigenous areas of the game, or when you did reach into that folklore that obviously is a huge element of the story that you're telling. You know, you wrote and directed the game as well, Phil. How did you go about doing that right, or with respect to the local peoples?
So basically, I really wanted to, you know, of course it's kind of obvious, but I really wanted to portray all the cultures that we have in the game in an albeit idolized, but also like truthful and accurate light. And those indigenous culture, even though everyone who's grew up in New Caledonia knows them well, like a lot of the languages has seeped into New Caledonian French, and a lot of the customs and expressions also are part of day-to-day life. But at the end of the day, I'm not a Kanak person, and
the
I
Kanak
didn't.
are the indigenous folk
Yes.
of New Caledonia. Yep.
And because of that, I didn't feel like 100% legitimate to tell a Kanak focused story, but it was also super important to, of course, portray the Kanak culture in the game because it's a big part of New Caledonian culture. So what we did is that we had we knew a lot of folks there who were very supportive of the endeavor up front, but when the time came to write the actual stories and the dialogue, we reached out to a musician and translator then, who has become a great friend now, who's called Toan Tomaja, who plays a character in the game and sings a few songs in the games as well. And he translated the script and provided cultural feedback on the story and the character arcs and the relationships between the characters. The Kana character, I might say, because some arcs in the game are very much focused on other cultures which he didn't have input on. So he told us if something worked, didn't work, and we adapted. And at the end of the day, he was so happy with the story that he was super eager to actually participate in the game through songs and through playing a character and things like that. And
incredible.
It's a really, really great relationship that we built. And I think he's the person who championed the game the most in the community on the island. And that's been really, really great. And when we went to New Caledonia late last year,
the whole team as well, by the way, which is really cool, right? So give us a little bit of background on that just for a second.
Sure. Well, so we did a team trip there. In an ideal world, we would have done one earlier, like at the start of production, to gather references, to kind of let everyone be emulsified by the place and things like that. The reality is we didn't have the resources to bring everyone early on.
Yeah, across the other side of the world, right?
Yeah, it was a very, very logistically complicated trip. So what we did is that we did have, myself, Thierry, and 3 other people from the team are from New Caledonia. So that core, we made sure that those people were able to transmit as much as possible about New Caledonia to the rest of the team who had never been. It wasn't only about, opening books and checking out image references and things like that. We really wanted them to get the nitty-gritty of what the culture is actually about and what day-to-day life is about. So we did our best to give that to them, which they really latched onto, and they're more New Caledonian than me in many ways now. But that wasn't enough for us, even though that was great and that allowed us to make a really great game, that wasn't enough. And so we really felt that the rest of the team needed to experience the culture firsthand as well, and they deserve to meet the folks who worked on the game from New Caledonia, like the voice actors, the musicians, the technicians who did the voice recordings and things like that. So we planned the trip. We were probably like 75-80% done with the game at that point. But that trip was more of a human thing than a production thing. But
immerse yourself in the place.
Yeah, for sure. And it did end up sparking some changes and some adjustments in the actual game. But thankfully, even without that trip up front, we were able to transmit enough to the rest of the team that the game was really faithful. We kind of, held ourselves accountable for making the game, accurate.
Yeah.
And so, we took everyone, and they got to, visit the landmarks that we recreated in the game, meet with the local choirs and the singers and the voice actors that they animated characters on top of the voices and things like that. And it was a very emotional moment. It was it didn't feel like the end of the adventure because we still had a bunch of work to do on the game, but it was definitely a milestone for everyone in the team. And it was also a moment where And it was also a moment where, because the game was far along and we had a lot of stuff to show, there's something in New Caledonia that's called the coutume, which is kind of a ceremony, a traditional ceremony where you offer appreciation through gifts and words to someone hosting you or helping you, or, you know, it's basically a gesture of respect and appreciation and friendship and kindness towards someone. And you usually receive one back too. And it's really codified and really important in the Kanak culture. And so we're able to go to Lifu, which is one of the smaller loyalty islands where the Jeo language is from. The Jeo language is the Kanak language that's spoken in the game. And we're able to go there and present through a coutume, present the game to the locals, to the local traditional authorities, but also to the local people, because basically like 90% of the island gathered to, you know, be there and spend that moment with us. And we presented the game and we basically got, you know, validation from those folks. And that's in big part thanks to Thoan that I mentioned earlier, who was able to champion the game and to, you know,
be your advocate internally. Yeah, for sure. And that moment was very, very important for, you know, the whole legitimacy of telling that story. That was, of course, a topic and a question for us. So yeah, that was an important part of the trip. I can imagine how emotional and how incredibly like, you know, they being at the end of the game in that moment. And I mean, what a manifestation of like some of the things that people, I think every game developer would love that if they had an island that they could go to where people approve or disapprove of, you know, the game that they're making in this big, beautiful like ceremony. It wasn't like a gladiator moment where there was like the thumbs up or thumbs down moment or anything.
No, it's not that intense, but I mean, the reality is that they embraced the thing with open arms. Like, it was super, super, super positive.
It's incredible.
The local people, they were really hyped about what we were making. It was most stressful for us, you know. I don't know. There's kind of a pressure when you're portraying a certain culture, especially a culture that hasn't been portrayed in virtually any media. You know, there's like there's a form of respect and weight from the responsibility of doing that I think like was stressful. But
I think there's also
moment.
No, sorry, continue.
No, I was like, but the moment where we realized that, oh, they are not skeptical about what we're making, you know, they're embracing it and they understand where we're coming from with it and things like that was so liberating. And
it's incredible.
It was great.
And it doesn't, I think there's a natural fear there as well, you know, in regards to not wanting to, no matter the lengths that you go to, you know, to ensure that you do something respectfully, even having people on your team or the consultation or whatever. Like no one person or no one authority really speaks for the entirety of a culture or the entirety of an identity or the entirety of a community. And so to actually, like you said, it's 95% of the island there. I think that's a pretty good representation, or, you know, one of the best ones you're going to get. And to have them, like 85% of the way through the game, it must have been absolutely nerve-wracking and exhilarating and incredibly emotional moment. How special.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, we're talking about resources and that you couldn't get over there a while ago, you know, at the start of the game, but you're obviously able to make it happen with the team almost at full size later on. And I imagine that's in, what do you call it? That we have a lot of thanks to give to your pals at Kepler and Kowloon for that. So let's talk about the relationship between yourselves and Kepler and Kowloon. We've had a couple of studios on who've either been funded by Kowloon Knights, who are an independent games fund, but also, you know, associated with Kowloon Knights is Kepler, Kepler Interactive, the publisher, who you're also a part of. Your wonderful studio at Awaceb. So tell me about how that relationship began and when Alexi and his pals started, you know, skulking around your studio windows and,
So it goes back to 2018, I think, where we had, like I mentioned, Thierry and I were, doing side jobs and prototyping on the side. At the end of 2018, we had like a decent prototype for Chia. And we started, sending out pitches for the game. And at the same time, like very close to us starting to pitch the game, there was, I think it was a Polygon article that was Kowloon's kind of reveal, kind of, hey, we exist, we're funding, the new Teddy Deef game and a bunch of other cool stuff. And I was like, that sounds super interesting. I like that lineup. I like those names. I like that approach. And so I reached out. We had other discussions with other publishers, but nothing was, clearly taking shape at that point. So I reached out, and what struck me was how smooth the conversation went from that first cold email, and I got an answer super quick. I got in a call super quick. I got to meet Alexi fairly quick too. And
this is Alexi Garavarian, the CEO.
Yep. And being French, he had some, knowledge and sensibilities about New Caledonia, which other publishers we had talked about didn't. And I don't know, it just clicked and it just made a lot of sense. And yeah, it was just a very different experience from the other discussions we've had until then. And there was an openness and an understanding of where we were coming from that was really reassuring too. Like I emailed from my, personal Hotmail address. We didn't have like a proper, studio thing going on, but they didn't care, they were hyped about the game and stuff like that. So
yeah, new Cali Phil 69 at hotmail.com. Yeah. Fund our game. Yeah.
Almost. But, and that was reassuring, and the discussions were great, and it ended up working out. We had pitched, I think the very first pitch was way more humble than what the game ended up being.
Nice. You did a classic bait and switch. It was good.
Well, we didn't expect it ourselves to become this big.
For sure.
But yeah, we pitched like a fairly, humble thing, like a reasonable exploration game. And through the support of the next couple of years, we realized, that the game might, deserve maybe a bit more.
Yeah, it has that potential to be something bigger.
And Kowloon, helped us realize that and helped us, take that route and reimagine the game as something bigger. And that relationship, there's nothing to say about those 2 years. It was so smooth, it was as an indie dev, you always hear about those horror stories and you're like, that might be too good to be true. I've heard so many bad things about publishers. How come that contract is so small and simple? It doesn't make sense.
Kowloon's contract's like 2 pages or something.
Yeah. And, we didn't see any red flags, so we went with it, and it ended up being just how they advertised it. It's like developer first, just no bullshit kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was great for us because I don't know, we didn't know, how those relationships usually go, and we were kind of scared about them, and that was.
What's your first time? And I totally get what you mean as well, like navigating these things.
Yeah.
Like I see so many other developers, like especially here in Australia or something, hooking up in sort of, business relationships or agreements and stuff with folks. And even when it looks fantastic, there's always this feeling of like, but like, surely they're going to get us somehow. Like it can't be this way, or it's so hard. And I think even just navigating or understanding a contract for the first time, and all these weird things like first right of refusal, or non-disparagement agreements, or like all licensing and everything and rights, and it can be incredibly overwhelming when you're just some kids really at the start of this thing that came together to make a game. But yeah, they're obviously incredible folks to work with, and we hear a lot of folks come onto the podcast who work with Kaledonia and say the same.
For sure. Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
So you but that's the Kowloon side of things, right?
Yep.
But you're also one of the founding members of Kepler Interactive. So and correct me if I'm wrong at any point here, but I think I understand the Kepler model. Kepler is a studio-owned publisher, essentially, right? Where there are there 9 of you?
7.
Seven founding studios that came together to essentially found Kepler Interactive as their own publisher. Right? And so it's this incredible model where there's studios who are being published by this publisher actually all together own this publisher as well. And so you're one of the founding studios that came on. It's an interesting model. So tell me about, one thing is like looking at a contract for just funding your game and wondering, but then when Alexi comes along with this incredible harebrained scheme to create a publisher that the studios own, how did that conversation arise, and how did you navigate that for the first time?
So that conversation started somewhere in 2020, I think, probably. And basically, I think just the relationship we had with Kowloon was so good. The milestones we hit were convincing enough, I guess, that they were like, they saw Awaceb as a studio with potential. Just, to clarify, we are the smallest, least established studio of the bunch, like by a mile. Like we're the youngest, and
you're the baby sibling of the group.
We're the for sure. Like we have the most to learn from everyone. Like I feel a little bit the imposter syndrome is definitely striking hard with the whole Kepler thing, because I sometimes wonder, it's gratifying that they believe in the studio and what we're making. That's so amazing, but it's also like we have a long ways to go before we're at the slow clap or that level.
Because the studios are, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you've got A44, Timberline, Slow Clap, who did Sifu. You have Ebb Software, Shape Farm, and then you. Yeah,
that's it.
And spread all over the world. Like what? Shape Farms in Tokyo, everywhere. And A44s in Wellington, and Slow Clap. Are they in Paris or are they?
They're in Paris, yeah.
Yeah. So all over the place. Alpha Channel's in
all
Toronto.
Yeah. And so we knew some of those studios, some of those folks, not everyone, but basically the center point of the whole thing is the Kowloon team. Well, Alex's team has allowed us to get to know each other and get to feel if it would be a good match. So basically, when we started having this conversation, I had chats with other studio founders, and basically it's kind of dogs sniffing each other's butt a little bit. It's like, are we going to be friends? It's basically, are we going to be friends?
Do our tails wag, or do our parents have to pull us apart? Yeah,
that's very much it. And that's still how it goes whenever we're considering new studios for investments and or publishing and things like that. It's very much based on studio culture, founders, mindset, and of course, like, the projects and the games, but it's a very human thing still. And so basically we had this conversation. Alexi pitched us the idea, which seemed it felt like the Kowloon thing felt when we signed at first, which is like kind of a bit too good to be true. It's like, why doesn't this exist yet,
already.
you know.
Yeah. And why us? And yeah.
Yeah, a
You're
little
like,
bit,
has Alexi got the, the longest play Ponzi scheme going on, and we victim number 7 or something? Yeah.
We'll see. Well, I mean, so far we don't, so far it's going good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're having this discussion, and we're considered to be a founding studio, and we're in the situation where Awaceb, like growing the studio and going for a more ambitious project has worked out great for us, from Fosilico to Chia. And we're in that position where we want to have the comfort to keep, growing up to the point where we feel we're at the right balance. And that, as any studio owner knows, that gymnastic of having to look for funding alongside making games and stuff like that is the hardest part, probably. And that promise of Kepler is that it alleviates a lot of that stress and a lot of that logistic. And that was kind of a godsend for us, because as a small studio, we like every second, every minute counts. Every minute of our time, we're very much hands-on as well, Chia and I, on the production. And we're like, if we can be in a comfortable, like reassuring position where we don't have to chase the money, then we're definitely going to be able to make better games.
And that's one of the promises of Kepler as well, is that whole operational side of running a studio too, is that they obviously have a huge amount of support. Like, so it's not just like Zach and Pierre and that crew on the publishing side of things helping to publish your game, but then you've even got like, Ashley on the talent side and Joe on, finance, and all these people who are like setting up this infrastructure and all these options and tools to be able to support creative founders and studio heads like yourselves to stay on the tools without all of the annoying logistics of running a studio, right?
Yeah.
And as far as I understand, it's kind of a little bit a la carte to some degree too, right?
It is.
Because Slow Clap has their own internal marketing crew as
they
well.
Do. Yeah, they do. And we don't. And the thing is, as a group, we kind of discuss, we're like, okay, there's a need. Some studios have a need for, let's say, like some QA support or whatever. And then as a group, we discuss, okay, who has that internally, who hasn't, like, would it benefit everyone to build something from scratch, or to maybe trying to reach out to a partner to get like preferential rates for the whole group, or, there's many ways that, being a bigger group of folks gives you way in that type of stuff. And basically what you need, you get. Well, we need a lot more than Slow Clap, probably. We're so small, we're learning, we're growing. We don't have like marketing expertise and things like that. So we are definitely, it trickles down to us, which is amazing. Well, we try to, give back as much as we can too on many fronts. I think we can, and I think we wouldn't have been considered if we didn't have anything to bring to the group as well.
You have the best costume by far. Like that's what you preach. It's a pretty incredible model, and it's amazing. I could talk about the Kepler model and how interesting it is, and how the studios interact and everything for a long time. But I am keen to focus on Awaceb and get back to Chia. So you come on 2020 2021 to Kepler, and what stage of the game, what stage is the game at this point, and how's it trucking along?
2021, I think we were looking at launching sometime in 2022 at that point, which was a bit too optimistic. And I think Kowloon and Kepler knew that and realized that, but they also realized that, the game was worth some extra time and some extra effort, and it didn't matter much in the discussion. It was like, the game, the potential for the game is here. The partnerships we had signed with PlayStation and Epic were, putting us in a really great spot. So it was like there was a time where we discussed about, do we wait for Chia to launch before having this discussion?
Oh, you mean about joining Kepler?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, yep.
Yeah. But we figured that we want to transition into the next thing with as little worry as possible.
Yeah,
and
clever.
joining Kepler early was definitely a step in that direction for us.
Yeah. Interesting. So I want to actually just dive into some of the game's design and some of the amazing features in it. Because like I tell you what, like there's a couple of things that were really joyous to me, and I think that's really the word that I use when I interacted with Chia and my experience with it. One of them was like shredding on my ukulele. The ukulele. So in the game, everyone, you Chia, which is actually the titular character. So the name of the game, Chia, is also the name of the game's protagonist, young girl. How old is Chia? Roundabouts? What, like 11 or 12 or something?
12, yeah,
12. And so you're playing as Chia, but you get given a ukulele by one of the characters early on, and there are moments in the game where you're playing various instruments in a rhythm-based sort of mechanics and interactions, and the ukulele playing mechanic is so awesome. It's like this radial this radial menu with the notes on it, and the rhythm comes in, and it's actually amazing how rapidly you can fire between notes and everything, and it's like a kind of a really forgiving system as well. How did you, obviously, Robert was on from the start of this title, right? Like, was the music was Robert like a huge influence there? Like, do you think the music has such a presence because, unlike a lot of projects, your composer was there from the very beginning, or was music like a large part of your childhood growing up in New Caledonia? It was just a no-brainer that it was going to be in the game from the start, in such an interactive way as well.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a mix of many things. The New Caledonian culture inspiration thing, we decided we were going to draw from everything that makes it rich, and that includes language, landscapes, customs, ethnicities, folklore, legends, and of course music. Like, music is a huge part of New Caledonian culture, and so we figured, okay, we need to portray that aspect of the culture in a proper form, and the actual mechanic, the ukulele, I think I was just getting into guitar and I just wanted to prototype something cool. And that was one of the very first mechanics that we designed, but it kind of stems from that idea, which was the philosophy from the very start of the game, is that we're going to design this as a toy box, and every mechanic should be its own little standalone, fun, enjoyable, analogic thing. And so we basically designed everything around this, and because the music was such a big part, we felt like having a bespoke like music mechanic was cool. And then it was about it was basically trying to find ourselves an excuse to have a cool ukulele mechanic. Is that how do we ingrain that into the story and the open world design and things like that? So you end up having those, you mentioned them, the music sequences where you have that rhythm gameplay, and those moments are often like story related, where you're bonding with characters and things like that. And then in the open world, you can play the soul melodies, which are like magical tunes that affect the world.
Change time of day or different things, similar to like the ocarina in Zelda.
For sure. And so it's basically the way we've designed everything in the game is that we have that cool little standalone thing that works on its own. How do we put it to use to make the open world exploration and the story more engaging? And because music is a big part of New Caledonian culture, then it was a no-brainer that one of those chunks of gameplay should be music-centric.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning. It's just so much fun as well, and it's also beautiful. It doesn't feel like expert mode on Guitar Hero. It's really forgiving, which leads me into the next thing that really stood out about the game for me is you can actually just through every one of those music experiences, you can just right click and the prompt is on screen at the entire time. You can just right click in the thumbstick and you just skip it. Like you can, or sorry, you can autoplay, not skip it.
Autoplay.
It just like plays it for you, and you can watch these beautifully directed, cinematics essentially of the locals playing or singing, or with your singing with your father. It's absolutely an interesting choice, and also one I saw extended to in the pause menu where it says skip this gameplay sequence.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a bit of a topic in the industry that's been discussed a bit, right? Is this notion of like there are people who are playing these games. BioWare's been doing this for a number of times. They're playing them just for the story. They're playing them just for the experience. They're not actually looking for the challenge of like a Dark Souls or some sort of Call of Duty, making it to the next checkpoint to progress the cutscene. So talk to me about that decision that you and the team made to make the game, or almost like make the story and the experience of Chia and New Caledonia accessible in that way.
Yeah. The way, so for the music gameplay segments, I think it came from a simple realization that some people just really dislike rhythm games, and they really don't want to be bothered. And that was like very pragmatic like that, is that
you're not going to die on that hill, like forcing people to play a rhythm game. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. That's not, what the game's all about. It's a cool way to keep you engaged in the moment. But if you're really not into it, which I'm happy to hear that you're having a good time with it, but let me tell you that some people online, they're definitely not, because that's a very specific type of gameplay that some people will some people will dig it, some people will just never like it, no matter how well designed it is. So we figured, let's just make it optional. The scene and the music itself is good enough for it to be worth watching. If you don't want to have the controller in and what is happening, then all good. That wasn't like a big leap of faith. I think it's just like kind of a convenience thing. The one that took a little bit more discussion and that was a little bit more out there and not standard for the industry, I think you mentioned, is the skip gameplay segment thing. And there's actually another one, which is that in the main menu you can enter a chapter selection where you can basically jump into any chapter in the game without having played them before. Like you don't have to finish the game first to jump in, and so those two mechanics.
You're breaking all the golden rules.
which that's the thing, is that are these rules? It's kind of the way it's kind of the way I go about it, is that if I can't justify why we've been doing it like this for as long as games have existed, then maybe it's worth trying different. Like, I mean, when you pop in a DVD, or whoever watches movies on discs anymore, but you have a chapter selection. Like you don't have to watch the movie once to go to the ending.
You can flip to the last page of a book.
Exactly. And that's like I get that it's for games it sometimes comes from a technical limitation thing where it's not as easy. Well, if the game is very linear, then it might be easy, but for an open world game, it might be not as easy to have you jump at any time. But it also comes, I think, from the status quo being that you have to play through it, and I can't find the justification for gatekeeping the content behind time or skill or whichever player driven variable. So I was like, people are jumping in, they are buying the game, they should have access to the content that there is. Like if they want to show a specific part of the game to someone, let them just jump in. If they get bored with a section of the game, is that we did our design job wrong in a way, so let's
especially when you've got such a special experience that you're trying to share with people. It's like it's more important that people are able to access that regardless of their ability or disability or inclination or interest. It's not like you're just some game where you're shooting people from war-torn countries, and there's no real grander or more important message. Like you spent so many years of your life and in consultation with so many people from the local region, and that this game actually means something. And is quite special in a way that a lot of games aren't. It's, it really struck me that your decision to make these various parts of the game just immediately accessible, regardless of skill or challenges.
Yeah,
it's a really great one.
I think our job is to make it so that people want to experience the whole thing as you entered it. If they don't want to, then either we've done something wrong or they just don't want to. And
I love that approach.
Yeah, who am I to tell them how to? Yeah.
All right. The other one that I love is the soul jump, man. Like that, to me, the game, the moment I got the soul jump and I sort of realized the possibilities of, and it's something that we've seen in a couple, in some different games, obviously, like David O'Reilly's Everything and stuff like that. But I mean, it's amazing how many gameplay possibilities it opens up. Like just, when you're diving for clam pearls and you're running out of oxygen and you shoot into a surgeonfish, and then you shoot into a dolphin. Also, by the way, the first time I got into a dolphin, I realized it was probably the fastest way to travel around the island. Was like an epic moment for me playing Chia. It was so much fun doing flips out of the water. I was like annoying my partner while she was trying to work, whilst I'm showing her all my backflips that I'm doing out of the water as a dolphin. So talk to me a little bit about soul jump. Was soul jump something that is linked to folklore within New Caledonia and the peoples, or was it just, again, like, this is really fucking cool, we played David O'Reilly's Everything, like, let's get it in there?
Well, just like the ukulele, I think I was really getting into possessing animals through magic. Then in
the game, not in real life. Like,
no, yeah, no, and I'm just kidding. So that came from, to be perfectly honest, that came from a very gameplay centric idea. Like, we wanted a cool, like, game changing feature. It didn't come from a specific folklore story or a legend or something like that. It did tie into some afterwards, but I'm gonna explain. But we were like, okay, what's gonna be? We want Chia to have that special ability, a special mechanic that's gonna make the game different. And it went through many iterations. At first, it was just like a telekinesis thing where you could move objects around. Then it evolved into a soul jump type of mechanic where you could possess the object, but Chia would stay in place and she would kind of be in a trance-like state. And when you would unpossess them, you would go back to your body. But that wasn't super fun for locomotion because you would always go back to square one. It didn't allow you to combo stuff. And it slowly evolved into the actually like warping into the object or the animal and then jumping out of it and things like that. Yeah. And the moment it clicked for us that it being centered around animals mostly was a good fit is that a lot of New Caledonian folklores and legends are about anthropomorphic animals, like shape-shifting humans taking the shape of animals and vice versa. Right. Yeah. And it's very much centered around those themes. So like thematically, it really fit for the game as well, which kind of like is the way we designed everything in the game, is that we had a need or an idea that we wanted in there, and we looked at it through the prism of New Caledonian culture, and it all like very often shaped the way that specific thing could fit properly in the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just a fun way to make the game more, again, like physical, and tactile. We really wanted stuff to react, which is why like all our foliage is like physics driven, and like being able to just possess a physics driven coconut was a fun idea, and we went with it, and then it kind of fed into the whole open world exploration rhythm that kind of built itself as we were building those mechanics. But yeah, that's kind of where it came from.
I love that line, the ability to possess a physics-driven coconut. That's like just in isolation, out of context. It's probably one of the best lines on this podcast. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm really just possessing a physics-driven coconut as well. Like there are just some days where it feels like that. Well, Phil, it's just like, that was the other thing that I wanted to mention too, is your film background as well here, and I can imagine and your animation background and your eye there, and I can imagine as well, not just yourself, but folks on the team who are this way inclined too. It really comes through in this game. There's, I think, for such a special game, focusing on such a special culture and a part of the world that, like you said, is rarely or very seldom, sort of experienced by anyone outside of New Caledonia in this way, or has a production of this scale, focused on it. It's just so incredible the way in which some of these moments in the game, and these cultural moments, whether it be, like the costume or and all of the ways in which you're exchanging that, which is a fantastic way to ground and give context to fetch quests as well. It's it fits so perfectly into an open world game. I love it. But then there were moments in the game where I was genuinely moved. I remember there's the sequence where it's with the tribe that you go and see to get the totem, the sculpted or the wood carved totem, and you sit there and you play I'm going to forget the names, but the rhythm maracas on your feet, like the bracelets and the
sonai.
Yeah. That's and I'm there and I'm shredding with the with those. And there was actually at a moment where I think it was about 2/3 of the way through that sequence where there's the tribe have come together and they're dancing and Chia's there playing, where I actually hit that autoplay button and I just sat there and I watched it. And the way in which that sequence is shot and framed and everything felt like a kind of a cinematic treatment that, again, like we were talking about with Minecraft or with Blendo games, and obviously you've got a production values that are higher level than that, but at the end of the day, there's a simplistic beauty to your art direction and style of Chia. It just felt so wonderfully framed, and it felt like those cultural moments were really given a chance to shine through your and the team's eyes. So talk to me a little bit about the actual cinematic process, because the one thing, I mean, not to sort of belittle you and your team's work or anything, it's obviously a grand achievement, but the games industry now is very good at building large open world environments, right? You can build those quite quickly, and then populating them and getting them right is a different story, right? There's obviously a lot of polish and care involved in that. But one of the things that blew me away about this game, literally from the opening scenes, was how much animation is in this game.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about the cinematic process of not just how you went about framing these things or, storyboarding them potentially, or actually setting up, how you're communicating these cinematically, but the actual achievement here and the gargantuan amount of work animation wise. How many people are on the Awaceb team?
We're 9 when we shipped Chia.
Yeah, I mean, what the fuck, Phil? Explain how, I guess, is the question I have here.
So for the cinematic aspects of the game, you mentioned, I think, my background in film kind of dictated a lot of the direction for that stuff.
It's beautifully shot.
Thank you so much. That's super, super great to hear, because it's definitely a lot more effort than sometimes you think it's going to be worth. We don't have narrative systems to tell the story in the game. We don't have pop-up dialogue boxes. We don't have automatic dialogue cameras or anything like that. It's all when there's a story moment, it's bespoke. It's framed on purpose and animated on purpose, which was a lot of work. But I don't know, as a player, I really there's a lot of great ways to tell stories in games, but I think I personally am moved when it's told with voice and cinematic framings. I'm always I always take a step back from the game when I had to read dialogue boxes and things like that. I don't know, maybe it's the type of game I gravitate towards, but I really wanted to give the game that cinematic treatment, because I think it's the ultimate way to kind of I don't know, get out the most emotion and the most grandiose aspects of anything you're trying to portray. It's hard to. It's definitely doable, but I don't think I'd be able to make someone cry with a dialogue pop up. I don't think my writing is strong enough for that. It's just a thing about camera work, timing, music working in synergy to create emotion that I think I'm starting to nail down, and I really wanted to bring that to the game, because that's, I think, the only way I'm able to portray what I feel about those things. And the pipeline was fairly simple, to be honest. I think like Unreal Engine's cinematic tools are very efficient. Like we didn't have any major issues with them. The most hard work was, as you mentioned, the animation. It was all keyframed. Like our art style kind of allows for, some shortcuts here and there. We don't have to be like super precise in like the facial animations and things like that. It can be a little bit more
rudimentary, and it still communicates, and
the
art style sort of shaves off that margin of error there.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you add like some dramatic framings and good music and good timings, and you get out of that, you get a lot more than what you put in sometimes. And sometimes it just, it's hard to capture that specific synergy of things. I don't know. It's a fleeting thing.
I totally hear what you're saying in regards. Like, I mean, there are arguments to be made for, I mean, we had Segono on the podcast, and I mean, I think if you go and look at their Opus series of games, all of the reviews say this game made me cry. So we can leave the text box triggered crying to Segono. They've got that on lock. But this, like, especially for someone like yourself who has this, you would say like classically or tertiary trained in the cinematic language, it's one of the toolboxes of games, and we do it so effectively. And I think augmenting that experience that games have of like placing yourself, role playing, and having that agency moving around the world and affecting the environment and its people, and then complementing that with these incredibly well framed cinematic moments is really affecting, and it really was with Chia, especially considering when you go into it, how authentic the experience and what's being communicated and shared with you in regards to just like the culture of the island. Because sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with you about, that cinematic language being a part of, a video game maker's
toolkit, right?
Toolkit for sure. But I also think that there are ways to integrate them better to gameplay than what we did. I do like that sit back and watch aspect. I also think that for our next project, I have really high expectations about how we're going to be able to ingrain those narrative moments into more interactive stuff. I mean, we tried with Chia for we have those music sequences that are basically cinematic, but you're also engaged while playing. We have, mini games here and there that have, you're telling a bit of story, but you're also, cooking traditional food at the same time, and you're engaged in that stuff.
Really great, yeah.
And that stuff I want to keep digging into, because I'm happy that I have a base of skills to kind of make proper cinematics, but now I want to keep players engaged while they're experiencing that more cinematic feeling. I don't think those are I think those are complementary rather than,
Absolutely.
So yeah, I want to keep exploring on that front for sure.
Exciting stuff. Well, Phil, I think that's a beautiful place to leave it, with a promise of future things to come. Thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations again on Chia. For anyone listening, you can grab Chia currently on PlayStation Plus for your PS5 or PS4, and it's also available on Epic Games Store, right?
Yeah. That's it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry if I rambled a bit too much here and there, but it was amazing to deep dive into those topics with you.
No, the podcast is for rambling. We find the creatives who can ramble the most effectively and we bring them on the podcast. One thing as well that I want to point out, which is actually my favorite thing about the podcast so far, is you're a CSI jumper, your sweatshirt that you're wearing right here.
It's the Las Vegas one as well, like the original one, the only real one.
The only way. Okay, a bit of controversy on the podcast. We love that. All right, man. Well, hey, really great to hang out again. Looking forward to bumping into you in the next spot around the world where we do so.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Phil.
Cheers.